The White House, 1906. Theodore Roosevelt was scheduled to meet with foreign diplomats. But then a telegram arrived from Montana. A mother's son had died in a mining accident. What Roosevelt did next shocked his entire cabinet and changed labor laws forever. It was June 14th. The morning was already hot, humid in that suffocating Washington way that made even breathing feel like work. The kind of heat that wilted starched collars and made men's suits stick to their backs by noon. The White House was buzzing with activity. Japanese diplomats were arriving at noon to discuss trade agreements that could reshape Pacific commerce. German ambassadors at 3 to negotiate naval limitations. Roosevelt had a stack of bills on his desk requiring signatures, appropriations, land grants, postal reforms. Congress was pushing him hard on Panama Canal funding, threatening to cut the budget if he didn't compromise. The newspapers were demanding statements on 6 different issues, from railroad regulation to food safety to his latest hunting trip controversy. Theodore Roosevelt, at 48 years old, thrived in chaos. He loved it, lived for it. The more problems thrown at him simultaneously, the more alive he felt. His staff called it the Roosevelt whirlwind. That unstoppable force of energy and decision-making that could reshape entire policies before lunch and start 3 new initiatives before dinner. He paced his office like a caged lion, never sitting still, dictating letters to 3 different secretaries at once, occasionally stopping mid-sentence to drop and do 20 push-ups when he needed to clear his head and think. His staff had learned to keep up or get out of the way. His private secretary, William Loeb, appeared in the doorway holding a telegram. "Mr. President, this just arrived. It's marked urgent." Roosevelt didn't look up from the Panama Canal proposal he was reading. "Everything's urgent, William. Put it with the others." "Sir, this one is different." Loeb's voice had an edge Roosevelt had rarely heard. "It's from Montana, a mining town called Butte. A woman named Margaret O'Connor." Roosevelt looked up. His thick spectacles caught the morning light. "Mining town? What does she want?" "Her son died yesterday, in the speculator mine. She's asking if you meant what you said." Roosevelt froze. "What I said?" "Last month, your speech in Chicago. You said every American worker deserves to come home alive to their family. That we have a moral obligation to protect the men who build this nation." Loeb held out the telegram. "She wants to know if you meant it, or if it was just words." What Roosevelt did next sent shockwaves through the White House. He took the telegram, read it slowly. It was short, plain. The handwriting was shaky, written by someone whose hands were trembling with grief and rage. "Mr. President, my son Thomas O'Connor died yesterday in your America. He was 24 years old. The mine was unsafe. Everyone knew. The company didn't care. Profit over people. You said workers matter. You said you'd fight for us. Were you lying? If you weren't lying, come to Butte. Sit with me. Hear what happened to my boy, then tell me what you're going to do about it. Margaret O'Connor." Roosevelt read it 3 times. Then he set it down on his desk very carefully. He removed his spectacles, cleaned them with his handkerchief, put them back on. "William, cancel the Japanese delegation." "Sir, they've traveled from Tokyo. We can't just..." "Cancel them. Reschedule for next month. Cancel the Germans. Cancel everything for the next 4 days." "Mr. President, what are you talking about?" Roosevelt stood up. "I'm going to Montana. I'm going to sit with Mrs. O'Connor, and I'm going to hear about her son." The cabinet meeting that afternoon was chaos. Roosevelt announced his plan. His advisors erupted. "You can't cancel international meetings for one dead miner. The press will destroy you. They'll say you're weak, emotional. Montana, that's a 3-day train ride, each way." Roosevelt slammed his fist on the table, not in anger, in certainty. "That woman asked me if I was lying, and I will not be a president who lies. Thomas O'Connor died because we failed him, because we let companies value profit over human life. And his mother has earned the right to look me in the eye and tell me what that failure cost." His Secretary of State tried once more. This is political suicide. Then I'll die politically. Roosevelt's voice was steel. But I won't die morally. He left for Montana that night. The train ride west gave Roosevelt time to think, to read, to learn. He'd requested every report on mining accidents in America from the past 10 years. His staff had compiled a stack of documents 6 inches thick. Roosevelt read every page. The numbers were staggering. Thousands of men dead, thousands more maimed. Cave-ins, gas explosions, equipment failures, and in almost every case the same story. Companies knew the dangers, did nothing. Workers died, families shattered. By the time the train pulled into Butte, Montana on June 17th, Roosevelt wasn't just angry, he was transformed. Butte was a rough town, a frontier mining city that had grown too fast, built on copper and blood. Mining camps stretched in every direction, tin-roof shacks and company housing blocks as far as the eye could see. The air smelled of copper smelting and sulfur, a chemical tang that made your eyes water. Smoke from the smelters turned the sky perpetually gray. Men walked the streets with black faces and hollow eyes, heading to shifts underground or coming off them, their clothes stained with ore dust and sweat. Roosevelt noticed something immediately. No old men. Every miner he saw was young, 20s, maybe early 30s, because they didn't live long enough to get old. The mountains killed them before their hair turned gray. Margaret O'Connor lived in a small wooden house at the very edge of town, where the mining camps gave way to scrubland. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged. But the windows were clean and there were flowers, wilted from the mineral-poisoned soil but fighting to grow anyway. Roosevelt walked up alone, his boots loud on the wooden steps. His security detail protested loudly. He overruled them with a sharp gesture. "This is between me and a mother who buried her son. Wait here." He knocked, waited, heard footsteps inside, slow, reluctant. The door opened. Margaret O'Connor was 43 years old, though grief had aged her a decade in 2 days. Irish immigrant, second generation. Thin in the way people get when they work too hard and eat too little. Worn hands that had washed other people's laundry for 20 years to supplement her late husband's mining wages. Hands that were red and rough from lye soap. Her dark hair was pulled back severely. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her jaw was set with something harder than grief, something colder. Fury. "Mr. President," her voice was flat, "you actually came." "You asked me to." Roosevelt removed his hat. "May I come in?" She stepped aside. The house was tiny, 2 rooms, clean but spare. A faded photograph of a young man in a miner's clothes sat on the mantel. Thomas. He had his mother's eyes. "Sit." Margaret pointed to a chair at a small kitchen table. "I'll make coffee." "You don't have to." "I'll make coffee." It wasn't a request. Roosevelt sat. He felt enormous in the small chair, his large frame almost comical in the humble kitchen. Margaret worked at the stove. The silence stretched. Finally, she brought 2 cups, sat across from him. "My Thomas was a good boy," she began. Her voice cracked but held. "Smart. He wanted to be a teacher. But his father died when Thomas was 16. Mine collapse. So Thomas went into the mines to feed his sisters. That was 8 years ago." Roosevelt listened without interrupting. His usual energy, that constant motion, was completely still. The speculator mine was always dangerous. Everyone knew. The ventilation was bad. The timber supports were rotting. The men complained. The company said, "If you don't like it, quit." But there were no other jobs. So they stayed. So my Thomas stayed. Her hands gripped the coffee cup so tight her knuckles went white. "Yesterday morning he kissed me goodbye, said he'd be home for dinner. I made his favorite, beef stew." Her voice broke. Roosevelt waited. "The explosion happened at 2 in the afternoon. They say it was a spark, bad wiring. The fire spread through the ventilation system, the gas, the smoke. The men couldn't get out. The exits were blocked. Poor planning, cheap construction." My Thomas died choking in the dark because some company in New York wanted to save money on proper ventilation. Roosevelt's jaw clenched. His hands resting on the table were shaking slightly. But what Margaret said next changed everything. 17 men died with my son yesterday, Mr. President. 17 families destroyed. And you know what the company did this morning? Sent a man around with $50 for each widow. $50? That's what they think my boy's life was worth. And then they posted a notice that the mine would reopen tomorrow. Because there are always more poor boys who need jobs. Roosevelt's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. Tell me what you want me to do. I want you to make it stop. I want you to make them care. I want laws that say companies can't kill our boys for profit. I want inspections. I want safety standards. I want the men who own these mines to be held accountable when workers die. She looked directly at him. I want you to mean what you said in that speech, that American workers deserve to come home alive. I meant it. Then prove it. Roosevelt stayed in that kitchen for 7 hours. Margaret told him everything, every brutal detail, about the 14-hour shifts that left men too exhausted to think straight, to notice danger, about the lack of safety equipment, no proper masks, no ventilation systems that actually worked, no escape routes in case of disaster, about the way companies blacklisted workers who complained, making it impossible to find work anywhere in the region, about the children left fatherless, dozens of them in this town alone, about the widows who had to choose between starvation and sending their own sons into the same deadly mines that killed their husbands, perpetuating the cycle of death. Other miners stopped by as word spread through town. The president was in Margaret O'Connor's kitchen, actually sitting there, actually listening. They came in work-stained clothes, their faces still black with ore dust from morning shifts, nervous and angry in equal measure. They spoke in Irish accents and Norwegian and Finnish, immigrant languages mixing with broken English. They told their stories. They showed Roosevelt their scars, missing fingers, burn marks, lung damage that made them cough black phlegm. They described near misses, the moments they almost died but got lucky. They named friends who'd died. Patrick Murphy, crushed by a cave-in. Sven Lindstrom, gas explosion. Giuseppe Rossi fell down a shaft when a rope broke. By the time the sun set, Roosevelt had filled an entire notebook with names, dates, and descriptions. His hand was cramped from writing, but he didn't stop. Every story mattered. Every death had a name. At 9 p.m., Margaret made him dinner, the beef stew she'd prepared for Thomas. Roosevelt ate in silence, the weight of what he'd learned settling over him like a physical burden. Before he left, he did something that stunned everyone who heard about it later. He went to the small cemetery where Thomas had been buried that morning. Just Roosevelt and Margaret walking in the dark. He stood before the fresh grave and removed his hat. I didn't know your son, Thomas, Roosevelt said quietly, but his mother tells me he was a good man, that he worked hard, that he took care of his family, that he deserved better than what this nation gave him. I'm going to fix that. I swear it on your grave. On the train back to Washington, Roosevelt didn't sleep. He wrote page after page of policy proposals, safety standards, federal mine inspections, worker protections, corporate liability. He was no longer the man who'd left Washington 4 days earlier. Something had shifted, hardened, clarified. When he returned to the White House, his cabinet was waiting, prepared for disaster, prepared for political fallout. Instead, Roosevelt threw his notebook on the table. We're going to pass the most comprehensive worker safety legislation this country has ever seen, and we're going to do it this year. Sir, the opposition... I don't care about the opposition. Roosevelt's voice had that edge his cabinet knew meant the fight was over before it started. 17 men died in Montana while we were sitting here debating trade agreements. Margaret O'Connor buried her son because we've allowed corporations to treat workers as disposable. That ends now. The Federal Mine Safety Act was introduced in Congress 3 weeks later. The mining lobby fought it with everything they had, called it government overreach, predicted economic collapse, spent millions on opposition campaigns. Roosevelt went to war. He gave speeches in every mining state. He brought Margaret O'Connor to Washington, sat her in the gallery during the debates. He made congressmen look at her face while they argued that safety regulations were too expensive. He threatened to campaign personally against anyone who opposed the bill. The act passed on March 15, 1907. It mandated federal inspections, required safety equipment, established liability for companies whose negligence killed workers, created the foundation for every worker protection law that would follow. Margaret O'Connor lived until 1942. She never remarried. She used the small pension Thomas had earned to put his younger sisters through school. One became a teacher. The other became a labor organizer. Margaret kept the telegram Roosevelt had sent her after the bill passed, framed on her wall. It said simply, "I kept my promise. T.R." In 1938, a reporter asked 80-year-old Margaret if she thought Roosevelt had used her son's death for political gain. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That man came to my kitchen when he didn't have to. He sat with me for 7 hours when he could have been running the country. He listened, really listened. And then he fought. Was it political? Maybe. But my Thomas's death mattered. And because it mattered to Roosevelt, thousands of other mothers didn't have to bury their sons. That's not politics. That's humanity." There's a lesson in that train ride to Montana that echoes through history. Power means nothing if you won't use it to sit with the powerless. Leadership isn't about the grand stages or the international treaties. It's about the mother in the small kitchen in the forgotten town. The telegram that could have been ignored. The decision to show up when nobody expects you to. Roosevelt shaped American foreign policy. He won the Nobel Peace Prize. He built the Panama Canal. History books remember him for his achievements. But Margaret O'Connor remembered him for sitting in her kitchen, for listening to her grief, for making her son's death mean something. In the end, we're not measured by the monuments we build. We're measured by the people we saw when everyone else looked away. Subscribe for more untold human stories from America's past.